itself, and every anvil is set up to the blacksmith's height. So this is why when one blacksmith goes to another blacksmith's workshop, it's really annoying because it's not set to your height. The way we set up an anvil is we make a fist, lay our arms straight down next to us, and our knuckles should just brush the bit, which is this part here. So it just brushes. My one crashes into it. This is a bit of a fun game. Everybody tries to turn their hands over, so you put your hands out straight in front of you, turn them over. Brilliant. I can't. So that's the movement in my arms. So my father gave me a lovely gene, which basically a muscle in here doesn't allow my arms to fully turn over. So all my anvils have to be set up to my elbow slightly bent, and they're the right height. The idea of that is when we're holding the tongs, it's level with the top of our anvil. So that's why every anvil is set up to that blacksmith. And then each anvil is set up as well on all the edges. So this one's got a few damaged edges. Now I'm not going to hold it against it because it is sort of over 100 years old, so it's probably going to have a little bit of wear and tear on it. But we've got a rounded edge, we've got sharp edges, and each area does a different job. So generally you set that up yourself, you round them off, or you make them sharp, depending on your way of forging. So this is where we're going to squash his head. So now I've just squashed his head down a little bit, and we're going to put some eyes in. So this is where making an anvil the right height also helps. Because if you have to do stuff, like put eyes in, I've got to hold a tool, hold a hammer and hold the work. Now I've got a thing called a stay here, which is okay for holding it, but it won't hold the round bar where I want it because his head is wider than his body. So I'm going to end up damaging it. So what we do, we get the steel out, we grip it, and pull it between our legs. And this is where if an anvil's the wrong size, you shouldn't know about it. So there, just pop 2 eyes in. So just got a punch, and that was pretty much made just to make snake eyes. Clean them up. Just got to round a bit of his body off here that's still a bit lumpy. So each time I'm standing here talking and not pumping the bellows, the fire's actually getting colder. So coal, which is what I'm burning here, partially burnt coal, needs a lot of oxygen to burn. Hence the reason the size of the bellows. So every time I stop pumping, there's oxygen stops going into that fire, so it gets colder. So as I then start sort of pumping again, I have to pump quite a bit to get it up and going, and then I can just sit here and pump occasionally and chat. That part of his body. So now it really makes him look like a snake. Clean him off. Back in the fire. Now if anybody's been here through this whole procedure of making this slow work steak, about just over a quarter, maybe half the time of you watching me do this, you've just watched me pump bellows. So the period of time that you're actually hitting the metal is quite small. A lot of the time is actually heating it up again. Now this is where, modern days, we have an electric fan on the back, so we can keep the temperature of the forge up high all the time. So we can make these a lot quicker. So, I want him to bend on his neck, but I don't want to damage his face, so we call his face off. So I can hit that without damaging it. We turned him. So now we can look around corners quite happily. But it's not often you see a snake like that. So we're now going to work the rest of his body. And the reason we go so tight with that way is because when I bend it back the other way, his face will then line up. So generally with any forge work you do, you have to think 2 or 3 steps ahead. And sometimes you have to start in an area that you think, well, why are you starting that end when you should start from the other end? And it's just a matter of where you need to hold the steel and what you're going to end up damaging. Like his face, there's a lot I can actually damage on that, so that's why I do his tail first. Then I can hold his tail, do his face, and then the tongs aren't going to damage his face or his eyes. Because because even when the metal is cold, me hitting it is still going to send shocks through and it's still going to move it in my tongs slightly. And when you're doing a piece that's taking you 3-4 hours to make and you do that and it ruins a bit, you get a little bit upset. So here, pinch his face off because I don't want to get that damaged. And this is where we make each snake to look the way we want, just as it goes. So that's where I'm gripping onto his face now, so that's still nice and cold, but I still want to be careful with it. These tongs I know will damage it, so we put them down and we grab these ones, because these ones are rounded in there, so they're going to do less damage on his face, but still hold him well. So grip him. Bring him round. Lay him on that. So I want to move his head because he looks a little bit drunk at the moment. He's not quite seeing the world straight. And this is a really smart thing. So blacksmiths, obviously a lot of tools I use, I'm changing. So if you see me through this, I'll probably change tongs about 3 or 4 times. They're all around the anvil, which is really handy. But as you can imagine, the tongs, we use them because they're in the fire getting hot. Which end's facing up, tong end, so you go to grab this end. So what you have to be mindful of is never to grab tongs up here, try and grab them down there. I think that's probably where I get my most burns, is actually picking tongs up that are still hot. And what happens is you put a pair of tongs down somewhere where they shouldn't be. So every pair of tongs I'm using here, I've made myself for either different jobs that have come along or just at college. So these ones are called scrolling tongs. And when you see all the decorative metal work that's in like the spiral shapes, if we're doing that with the hammer and a little bit on the inside has suddenly gone flat and we're way beyond that point, you don't want to unroll it all, use scrolling tongs to get in there because these bits are hardened and we can just tweak where we need to tweak with these tongs. But they're also good if you need to tweak other bits. Because where they're hardened, I can grip hold of bits and twist the steel and know that it's not going to twist my tongs. So there I'm just moving him about, getting him into where I want him to.
Hello? Hello?
That. Give him a clean up. Now in medieval times, we didn't have paint. So to stop things from rusting, we had to use natural products, which I still use a lot of my work today to treat. So I think my painting of my metalwork is probably only about not even an eighth of what I make is painted. So what we do is brush him off. Now he's still what we call his black hot, which is, the steel is black. If I was to pick that up, he would still burn my hand quite happily. So generally anything we make in the forge, if we've made it and we're like, right, that's finished, we've got to let it cool down, always goes onto the front of the forge, so everybody knows anything on the front is potentially going to be hot. Whereas if you were to leave it on an anvil like that, you've got away, had your cup of tea, and come back, you think, oh, I'll pick that up now, and it might still be hot. So that is still throwing off a lot of heat. So I was saying, to stop things from going rusty, we have a couple of items that I use. So one is linseed oil, and we can put that on hot, and that soaks into the steel like it does with wood, because they're natural products, and when they're hot all the pores are open, so it soaks into the steel and stops them going rusty. Only problem, like with most natural ways of stopping things from going rusty or mouldy, you do have to retreat them every so often, depends on how much they're exposed to the moisture of the rain. The other thing we treat it with is that. Does everybody know what that is? And you can shout anything out because it's been called a potato. One of them. It is, it's beeswax. So what we do is we melt beeswax onto the steel. Now if it's too hot, it does actually ignite and burn off, which is no good, hence the reason why I've left him on the anvil. So I left him on the anvil because I'm the only one here and I'm not walking away. But the anvil acts like a big magnet for heat. That's just one cold lump of steel. By the time that gets warm, it's actually the end of the day and I want to pack up. So I leave him on there and that's sucking all the heat down. And then I have a pair of tongs for this because they get covered in beeswax. And what we can do, can you see there it's smoking off? there's still beeswax on here, so I know he's still a bit too warm. So we can actually flash cool him. We just dump it in the water very quickly. So we're not quenching him down, but we're just trying to cool the surface down. And we get our bit of beeswax, we lay it on. Again, you can all see it's looking wet. So that's the beeswax melting onto the steel. Now a little bit of smoke's fine. If there was lots of smoke, that would be too hot and it would just be burning off. So we've done that end. Then we have a clean rag. My wife hates this rag because I call it a clean rag, and it is, well, I don't know, compared to me at the end of the day it is. So what we do is that's actually got lots of beeswax on it because we always put a bit of excess on there. What we do is we wipe off some of the excess with it that goes onto the rag. But the rag is also obviously got a lot of beeswax on it, so we can treat small items with this. They'll do the same thing. So there's tail was a bit too cold, so I've just warmed it up. Then what we do is we let them cool down. It takes about 15 minutes for something like this to cool down, so you can touch it. And it goes there like that. And that's your slow worm.